9 experienced hikers, a slash tent on a frozen mountain, bodies scattered across the snow, some half naked in -40-degree weather, others with injuries so severe they looked like they'd been hit by a car. But here's the thing, there wasn't a single mark on their skin. The Soviet government investigated for months, then closed the case with one of the most chilling conclusions ever recorded. An unknown compelling natural force. What happened on that mountain in 1959? February 26, 1959. A search and rescue team trudges through deep snow in Russia's Ural Mountains, desperately looking for 9 missing hikers. They've been searching for days, and honestly, they're not expecting to find anyone alive. Not after 3 weeks in this frozen wilderness. Then one of the searchers, Mikhail Sharavin, spots something orange jutting out of the snow. It's a tent. But something's wrong. The tent is half collapsed, partially buried, and when they get closer, they realize it's been ripped open from the inside. Long, deliberate cuts. 32 centimeters, 89 centimeters, 42 centimeters. Like someone was so desperate to get out, they couldn't even bother with the door. They call out. No answer. They look inside. 9 backpacks. All the winter coats. Every single pair of boots. Food sitting on a plate, sliced and ready to eat but never touched. A flask of alcohol, completely untouched. But no people. And then they see the footprints. 8 or 9 sets of them, leading away from the tent and down the slope toward a forest. Here's where it gets weird. These aren't panicked running footprints. They're walking at a normal pace, but most of them are barefoot or in socks, in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. The searchers follow the tracks for about 500 meters before they disappear under fresh snow, and they all have the same question running through their minds. What could possibly make 9 experienced hikers abandon their tent, their boots, their supplies, everything they needed to survive, and walk calmly to their deaths in the freezing darkness? Now, you need to understand who these people were. Because this wasn't some group of inexperienced weekend campers who got in over their heads. These were the elite. The leader was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, brilliant engineering student. So talented he designed a portable stove specifically for this expedition. The group consisted of students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, all holding grade 2 hiking certifications. In the Soviet system, they were attempting a Category 3 route. That's the highest difficulty rating. The Everest of Soviet hiking challenges. You don't get to attempt these routes unless you're seriously skilled. There was Lyudmila Dubinina, just 20 years old, studying engineering economics. Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, Dyatlov's girlfriend. 2 guys both named Yuri, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, both 21 and 23. Rustem Slobodin, a UPI graduate working as an engineer. And then there was the oldest member, Semyon Zolotaryov, 38 years old, a World War II veteran covered in tattoos who joined the group at the last minute. Nobody really knew much about him. Actually, there were supposed to be 10 hikers. Yuri Yudin turned back on January 28 because his rheumatism was acting up. He was the only survivor. And for the rest of his life, until he died in 2013, he was haunted by one question. He actually said this in an interview. If I had a chance to ask God just one question, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night? They'd set out on January 23rd from the city of Sverdlovsk, heading for Mount Otertin. That's a Mansi word, the local indigenous people, and it means Goose Nest Mountain. The plan was a 300-kilometer winter traverse, one of the toughest routes in the Soviet Union. But they never made it to Otertin. Instead, bad weather and poor visibility pushed them onto a different peak, Kholat Shakhl. And here's something that'll give you chills. In the Mansi language, Kholat Shakhl means dead mountain. On February 1st, the group was exhausted, fighting through a snowstorm, and they made a decision that still puzzles researchers today. They were only 1.5 kilometers from the tree line, from shelter, from firewood, from everything that could keep them alive in a Siberian winter. But instead of descending to safety, they pitched their tent right there on the exposed slope of Kholat Shakhl. On a 30-degree incline, at 780 meters elevation, in the middle of a snowstorm. Why would experienced hikers do this? Some researchers think Dyatlov wanted the extra challenge points. Camping on the mountain slope instead of in the forest would make their expedition more impressive on paper. Others think they were just exhausted and couldn't go any further. But the most unsettling theory? That visibility was so bad they genuinely didn't realize how exposed and dangerous their position was. Their last diary entries were lighthearted. They wrote a satirical newsletter full of inside jokes. The final photograph shows them setting up camp, some of them smiling. They ate dinner around 6 p.m. Investigators later confirmed this from stomach contents during the autopsies. Everything seemed completely normal. And then, sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on February 2nd, something happened. Something so terrifying that it made 9 experienced hikers grab knives, slice their tent open from the inside, and flee into minus 40-degree weather wearing almost nothing. When the search team found the first 2 bodies on February 26th, they were under a massive cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonyshenko. Both were in their underwear, barefoot in the snow. Krivonyshenko had severe burns on his hands and legs, 3rd-degree burns. And here's the detail that makes your skin crawl. He'd bitten through his own knuckle, down to the bone. Medical examiners think he was trying to use pain to stay conscious, to fight off the hypothermia that was killing him. Next to the bodies were the remnants of a small fire. Not enough to keep anyone warm, but they'd tried. And the branches on that cedar tree? Broken up to 5 meters high. Someone had climbed up there in the freezing darkness, maybe trying to spot the tent, maybe trying to see what had made them run. Over the next 9 days, searchers found 3 more bodies scattered between the cedar tree and the tent. It looked like they'd tried to return to camp but didn't make it. Igor Dyatlov was found 300 meters from the cedar, lying face up in the snow, fists clenched against his chest like he was trying to preserve heat. His watch had stopped at 5:31 a.m. Zenaida Kolmogorova was 630 meters from the cedar, face down, like she'd been crawling through the snow. And Rustem Slobodin was discovered under half a meter of fresh snow with a small skull fracture. Not fatal, but enough to leave him disoriented and confused. All 5 died of hypothermia. The medical examiner confirmed it. Freezing to death after abandoning your shelter in sub-zero temperatures. That's tragic, but it makes sense. The case seemed straightforward. 5 people made a terrible decision, fled their tent for unknown reasons, and paid the ultimate price. But there were still 4 people missing, and when searchers finally found them in May, everything investigators thought they knew got thrown out the window. The snow was too deep, the search area too vast. After finding those first 5 bodies, rescue teams scoured the mountain through March and into April, but the remaining 4 hikers had vanished. They were about to call off the search when, on May 4th, a Mansi hunter's dog started barking at something near the cedar tree. The dog had detected clothing, and when rescuers started digging in a ravine 75 meters away, they found them. Buried under 4 meters of snow. Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov. But these bodies were different, very, very different. The medical examiner, Boris Vozrojdeny, had been doing autopsies for decades. He'd seen car crash victims, falls from buildings, violent assaults. But when he opened up Lyudmila Dubinina's body, he found something that shook him. 10 broken ribs, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left. Massive hemorrhaging around her heart. So severe it looked like her chest cavity had exploded from the inside. In his official report, Vozrojdeny wrote that the force required to cause this damage was comparable to the shockwave of a bomb, or an automobile moving at high speed. Semyon Zolotaryov had 5 broken ribs. Nikolai Thibault Brignol's skull was fractured so badly it had splintered into multiple pieces, the kind of injury you see in high-speed car accidents. But here's what makes absolutely no sense. There were no external wounds, none. No bruises, no cuts, no signs that anything had actually hit them. Their skin was intact. It was like some invisible force had reached inside their bodies and crushed them from within. Vozrojdeny concluded in his report, These fatal injuries could not have been caused by human beings because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged. Then there were the missing body parts. Dubinina's tongue was gone. Her eyes were missing. Part of her lips had been removed. Zolotaryov's eyeballs were also missing. Now, before you jump to conclusions, investigators later determined this was likely post-mortem decomposition. The bodies had been lying in running stream water for 3 months, and soft facial tissue is the first to go. But at the time, it looked horrifying. And then came the clothing analysis. The survivors had stripped the dead. Dubinina was wearing Krivonyshenko's brown sweater and pants. Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's hat and coat. There were knife cuts on some of the garments. They'd been forcibly removed. This was rational survival behavior. When someone dies of hypothermia, you take their clothes to save yourself. But it showed how desperate things had become in those final hours. On May 18th, investigators ordered radiation testing on the clothing. The results came back shocking. Krivonyshenko's sweater showed 9,900 decays per minute, nearly double the Soviet safety limit. Several other items showed elevated readings. But here's the context most people miss. Krivonyshenko had worked at the secret Chelyabinsk 40 nuclear facility and had participated in cleanup after the 1957 Kishtim nuclear disaster. Kolovatov was a nuclear physics student. They'd been exposed to radiation before this trip. Still, the timing was suspicious. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov received the radiation report on May 27th, and exactly 1 day later, on May 28th, he closed the case. The official conclusion? A compelling natural force which the hikers were not able to overcome. That's it. That's what the Soviet government gave the families. Not an avalanche, not a military accident, not a specific cause of death beyond hypothermia for the first 5. Just an unknown compelling natural force. It's one of the most bizarre official statements in investigative history, and immediately after closing the case, the files were classified. Locked away. The area around Kholat Shakhol was closed to hikers and expeditions for the next 3 years. No explanation given. Decades later, in a 1990 interview, Lev Ivanov admitted something shocking. He and his team had no rational explanation for what happened. He said they'd seen flying spheres in the sky during the investigation, glowing orange orbs, and that he'd received direct orders from high-ranking officials to ignore them and close the case quickly. So what really happened up there? Well, over the past 65 years, 7 major theories have emerged, each trying to explain the unexplainable. Theory 1. Soviet military testing. Multiple witnesses reported seeing glowing orange spheres in the sky that night. And here's the thing. Missile tests absolutely were happening in that region during February 1959. Yuri Yudin, the survivor who turned back, believed until his death that military activity killed his friends. The family still believe this. But no declassified documents have ever confirmed testing at that exact location on that exact night. Theory 2. Infrasound. This one comes from author Donnie Eichar's book, Dead Mountain. The idea is that wind hitting Kholat Shakhol's dome-shaped summit created infrasound, frequencies below human hearing range that can cause panic, anxiety, and the feeling that something's watching you. Kármán vortices are a real phenomenon, and they can generate infrasound. But there's no evidence it actually occurred that night, and it doesn't explain the catastrophic physical injuries. Theory 3. Paradoxical undressing. This is medically documented. When you're dying of hypothermia, your body sometimes malfunctions and makes you feel like you're burning up. Victims strip off their clothes thinking they're overheating. This explains why some bodies were found in underwear, but it doesn't explain the tent being cut open, the calm footprints, or why some survivors were clearly redistributing clothing to stay alive. Theory 4. The Mansi people killed them. This was actually investigated first. Soviet authorities interrogated several Mansi natives looking for suspects, but it was quickly ruled out. The Mansi had no motive. The area wasn't sacred to them. They were known for being hospitable to travelers, not violent. And most importantly, there were only 9 sets of footprints leaving that tent. Nobody else was there. And then there's the theory that's gained serious scientific credibility in recent years. In 2021, Two researchers from Switzerland published a study in one of the world's most respected scientific journals. They spent years analyzing the evidence, building computer models, even recreating the conditions on Kholat Syakhl. And what they discovered might finally explain how 9 people died on that mountain. But it also raises new questions about why they made the decisions they did that night. Johann Gaume from the Swiss Federal Institute and Alexander Puzrin from ETH Zurich spent years on this. They analyzed the slope angle, the snow conditions, the tent placement, and they proved something remarkable. A delayed slab avalanche could explain almost everything. Here's how it works. When the group cut into the slope to pitch their tent, they created a weak point. Then, for hours, katabatic winds, these intense downslope winds, piled more and more snow above their tent. The weight built up slowly, and somewhere between 9 and 13 hours after they went to sleep, a slab of snow about the size of an SUV broke loose and slammed into the tent. But this wasn't a massive avalanche that buried them. It was small, localized, just enough to hit the people lying down inside the tent with tremendous force. And because they were lying on their ski-reinforced tent floor, essentially a rigid platform, the impact caused those catastrophic chest injuries without leaving external marks. Think about it like this. If you're lying on a hard surface and something heavy hits you, the force has nowhere to dissipate. It crushes you from within. The study was peer-reviewed and published in Nature Communications, Earth and Environment. That's huge. These aren't conspiracy theorists or amateur investigators. These are credible scientists with computer models and field data backing them up. In fact, between 2021 and 2023, researchers documented actual slab avalanches at that exact location. One occurred just 700 meters from where the original tent stood. On the 60th anniversary in 2019, Russia reopened the case. Prosecutor Andrei Kuryakov led a new investigation, conducted 9 expert examinations at the site, and in July 2020 announced the official conclusion: avalanche combined with poor visibility. The group fled the tent after the snow hit, became disoriented in whiteout conditions with visibility down to just 16 meters, and ultimately succumbed to hypothermia and a secondary collapse in the ravine. But the families rejected it. Lawyer Yevgeny Chernusov stated, "The relatives will not accept this conclusion." And Kuryakov himself was later dismissed from his position, officially for conducting an unauthorized press conference. Because even with the avalanche explanation, questions remain. Why would experienced hikers camp on an exposed slope instead of descending to shelter? What made them split up after reaching the cedar tree? Why didn't the 4 who reached the ravine use the snow den they'd constructed there? And what about those lights in the sky that multiple witnesses reported? The scientists themselves admit the limits. Puzrin said, "We do not claim to have solved the Dyatlov Pass mystery, as no one survived to tell the story, but we show the plausibility of the avalanche hypothesis." Today, Kholat Syakhl has become a dark tourism destination. Hikers make the 14-day trek to see Dead Mountain for themselves. There's a memorial at Mikhailovskoye Cemetery in Yekaterinburg where 7 of the victims are buried. Yuri Yudin, the survivor, was laid to rest there in 2013 alongside his friends. The tent remains in a Russian museum. The diaries, the photographs, the last meal they never finished, all preserved. 9 watches frozen in time, and that final image of them smiling as they set up camp, completely unaware that in a few hours, something would go so catastrophically wrong.